My name is Dan Quart, and I'm running for re-election in the New York State Assembly's 73rd Assembly District. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we need a tested and experienced leader in Albany who gets things done. During this crisis, I've been working tirelessly to ensure my constituents have what they need. I have helped dozens of East Siders secure their unemployment claims after the Department of Labor failed them. I have helped organize free rides for seniors in need, distributed face masks in the district, and worked with many small businesses to ensure that they can access city, state, and federal funding. I am the son of 2 public school teachers and parent of 2 public school students. I know how important it is to make Eastside public schools remain some of the very best in the city. I've worked to bring more pre-K seats to the East Side. I've opened PS 527 in Yorkville East Middle School. I've helped fund our PTAs. I've worked closely with Hunter College to ensure that we have excellent education options from pre-K through graduate school. As a transit rider, I know that our transit system is the engine that powers New York City. When progress stalled on the 2nd Avenue subway, I helped secure $1 billion in funding to help reset construction and get the project done. When I found out the East Side had some of the worst air quality in New York City, caused by old boilers burning dirty fuel and sending dangerous pollutants into the air, I set up a fund to help residential building owners upgrade to cleaner fuel. For 3 years, I have received a 100% rating from the New York League of Conservation Voters for my commitment to environmental protection and climate action. I am the only actual pro-choice candidate in this race. I have worked to protect reproductive rights for years, which is why I was endorsed by Planned Parenthood. If given the opportunity to represent you once again, I will advocate for public hearings into the failure of the state's unemployment insurance system. I will fight to expand early voting, bring automatic voting registration to a vote in Albany, and support a constitutional amendment to allow people to vote by mail. Further, with so many of our local businesses suffering, I will work to expand access to government funding at every level for small businesses on the East Side and in Midtown Manhattan. I've spent a lifetime serving my community. As a pro bono attorney, I hosted legal clinics for tenants facing eviction. As a Community Board 8 member, I chaired the Transportation Committee. And as your Assembly member, I fight for you every day. I hope you'll join Congress member Carolyn Maloney, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Council members Ben Kalos and Keith Powers, and State Senator Liz Krueger in supporting my re-election campaign. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Judy Graham, and I'm campaigning for the New York State Assembly representing the 73rd District. I've been a New Yorker for almost 40 years, and I've been a business owner. You might even call me an unpaid activist. I am campaigning to unseat the incumbent of 9 years, Mr. Dan Quart, and I hope that I will earn your vote. A couple of things about Dan. One is a little bit disturbing to me. You see, Dan is actively campaigning to be the New York City District Attorney, all the while wanting to keep his seat in Albany. So I don't know exactly how he can do both, but if he could share his Superman cape with me and the rest of us, maybe we can all figure out how to save this city once more. I do believe in law and law enforcement. I believe we need to bring back bail, and we need to make criminals come to justice. I believe that gravity knives should be banned, something that my opponent repealed. No one can convince me that a 4-inch blade is a tool. It's not. It's a weapon. And I have the proof, and I know firsthand how that weapon ended up slashing a friend of mine. A homeless situation is not only a humanitarian one, it's also a health concern. But with compassion and sensitivity, we can make this issue much better than it's ever been. This election in November, it's not about Joe Biden and it's not about Donald Trump. It's about us. Do we want to continue on the same path of crime, lawlessness, businesses out of, people out of work, businesses closed, schools not working effectively, homeless population infiltrating us? I don't think we do. What I would like to do is bring law and bring sensitivity and sensibility back to the city. I'm the Dragon Lady, and I have a plan and a purpose and a broom to clean up the Upper East Side, and together we can make a clean sweep and make this city the shining jewel it's always been. Oh, and one more thing about me. I will be your full-time representative, completely committed to what it is that you want. I'm Judy Graham for New York Assembly, and I approve this message.
Welcome to Represent NYC Election Coverage, brought to you by Manhattan Neighborhood Network in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York State. My name is Ben Max. I'm the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. New Yorkers will soon be voting in the general election this fall for races including president and vice president, the U.S. House of Representatives, the New York State Senate and Assembly, and more. All registered voters can vote either by absentee ballot or by voting in person, either through early voting, October 24th to November 1st, or on Election Day, November 3rd. Today, we're happy to bring you a candidate debate in the 73rd Assembly District, which includes parts or all of Manhattan neighborhoods like the Upper East Side, Midtown East, Turtle Bay, and Sutton Place. Today's debate features the incumbent Assembly member, Dan Quart, who is the Democratic and Working Families Party nominee, and his challenger, Judy Graham, who's the Republican Party nominee. Both candidates are with us here by Zoom. Welcome, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Ben.
So we'll get started in just 1 second, but just to go over the format of the debate, we're gonna go for about 30 minutes, and each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question and about 1 minute for responses if needed. I'm gonna try to keep the conversation moving, but I'll also be asking you for some specifics or clarification if I think that's necessary. So don't be shocked if I interrupt towards the end of your answer or follow up with something that I think viewers want to know. If there's time, there might be a little lightning round at the end with a few yes or no or short answer type questions. We want voters to learn as much as possible about you and your positions here today. Your candidate statements will have just played for our audience before this debate, so we're not going to do opening statements, but at the end of the debate, there will be 1 minute closing statements. At the end of your time with each answer, I will give you a gentle thank you to signal that you should wrap up, and then you'll have a few more seconds to finish your answer before I jump back in to move things along. Please don't interrupt each other. You can always spend the beginning of your next turn responding to something that you heard from your opponent, and I'll do my best to make sure that everybody gets to say everything they're looking to get in and want voters to know. So let's make this a good discussion to help people be ready to vote in the 73rd Assembly District of Manhattan in the general election. So let's get started. First, let's talk about experience. We're going to start with the incumbent, Assemblymember Quart. Why do you deserve re-election to the State Assembly? And what accomplishments can you list for voters that you've achieved in this recent term?
Well, experience does matter, especially at a time where COVID has wreaked havoc both health-wise, but also in the economy of the city of New York and the state of New York. The 73rd Assembly District needs a trusted, experienced voice, and that's not just my 9 years in public office. That's 8 years as a community board member. That's my experience as a volunteer tutor in the public school system, as well as one of the top pro bono attorneys in New York City in my work helping tenants. So it's a long litany of experience, and I have a basic belief that people should run for office after a commitment to the community. And that's when I was elected in 2011 after a decade of service in the community. And I've used that service, that experience in the community to pass over 30 pieces of legislation in nine years. Last session, 5 or 6 different pieces of legislation. We can go over them during the debate, but things as important as the co-op and condominium tax abatement makes a significant difference for my constituents, especially in tough fiscal times as we are. So I think going forward, trying to dig this city out of the difficult problems that it has financially, that the 73rd Assembly District, the East Side, Midtown needs my experience and what I've done in Albany and will continue to do on their behalf.
Thank you. Ms. Graham, you want to be elected to the State Assembly. Tell us about your experience and what brings you to this race and why you're deserving of the position.
What brings me to this race is that I've been a resident of New York City for nearly 40 years, which is actually almost as long as Dan's been around. That being said, I bring life experience to this campaign. I look at the Upper East Side, and what I look at and what I see is like a great big family. It's like a great big room, a great room where everybody comes in and they air their differences and they talk about what they like, what they don't like. There's always like the Thanksgiving dinner, it's always a lot of complaints and whining and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, what I bring is real New York experience. And I have been a business owner. I know what it's like to write checks for employees. I also bring with it a real estate background, so I understand contracts and some contractual laws. And I really care about this city. As a transplanted New Yorker, I came here with a dream. And what I want to do is continue that dream. So far, it's been great up until recently.
Okay, thank you. So let's stick with you actually and tell us a little bit more about what you want to do if you're elected. If you were victorious in this race, what would be your top priorities going to the State Assembly in the new year?
Okay, thank you, Ben. It really boils down to, I think, two really huge issues. One is economy. When you can jumpstart this economy in the Upper East Side and you can lure back our 1%ers who are responsible for paying nearly all the taxes of New York, and you can catapult businesses again, and you can resurge what we have lost, so much of it, businesses like restaurants, so on and so forth, that is going to be a huge infusion into New York City. Right now, the Upper East Side is really suffering because what it's lacking is it's on life support. It truly does not have the resources to rebound in the way that it needs to be. So economically is one issue, number one. The second issue that I see is very, very important is safety. People do not feel safe on the Upper East Side. I hear it every day as I walk around in my neighborhood. I hear it in my living room. I hear it in my parks. I hear it everywhere. There are huge concerns about robberies. People I know have been robbed. I get reports every day about something happening in an assault way that's happened on the Upper East Side.
So in our last 30 seconds of your time here, can you give us one proposal on each of those two fronts, the economy and safety, that would be at the top of your agenda?
Yes, I can. One of the things I would do for boosting the economy is I would love to bring back the tax-free days of shopping and dining in New York City, but not let's just make it 1 week. Let's make it for 6 months. Okay. Let's really infuse this.
And on safety?
And on safety, what I would like to do is I feel that we have to refund our police with training. That is very important. Without police protection, we do not have a viable city.
Okay. Assemblymember Quart, top priorities if reelected, or even for the rest of this term, the state legislature has obviously had a unique year. What do you want to get done that hasn't been done? Where do you want to take the legislature? The assembly obviously is more where you can impact things than the overall legislature. But what do you want to get done here, either the rest of this term or in a new term?
The economic revitalization of New York City. That is far and away the most important issue as we go forward. How do we achieve that is much more difficult. The primary way to do that would be through federal stimulus money, but that is controlled by the federal government, not the state. And I'm hoping, working with our federal elected officials like Congresswoman Maloney, who's doing everything she can, we can find a way to have block grants to the states, which can then filter down to New York City, which we are desperately in need of. But if that money is not forthcoming, we will have to make tough decisions. And that cannot be placating the 1%, the highest wage earners. we will have to make tough decisions on tax increases. And I'm willing to say that, even coming from the East Side, where a disproportionate amount of my constituents would have to pay those taxes, because there is no other viable alternative other than to cut services to a point where we may not be able to come back, whether that's education, Medicaid. Who are we cheering at 7 o'clock at night when we're cheering for those frontline healthcare workers? But we're also have to fund them so their programs are available so they don't lose their jobs. So that is the most pressing need. Yes, we are deserving of federal stimulus money. We send so much money to Washington and do not receive 100 cents or even anywhere near 100 cents on the dollar. But if that is not forthcoming by the end of this calendar year or by November, we're going to have to make tough decisions. And I'm ready to say that I will go to my constituents and explain to them that the vitality of not just the East Side, but the entire city of New York is dependent on finding revenue enhancements. And that's what I would push for in the next term.
Are there other things that either of you want to jump in to mention in terms of the city and the state's recovery from the impacts of the COVID pandemic and, of course, the fall it has had socioeconomically? Are there other things that need to happen here in terms of the recovery that either come through the state level or anywhere else that you would advocate for? We've heard a couple of different things from you, but are there other things on the agenda that New York City really needs beyond federal stimulus, potentially some of the tax breaks Ms. Graham mentioned, or perhaps some of the tax increases you mentioned, Assemblymember Quart? Do either of you want to jump in with one or two other ideas?
Ms. Graham, you can go.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. First of all, there is such a failure in our political schematic we are using and we have at this point. It doesn't help when we have defunding the police that are not able to do their jobs. If we don't propose and we do not have safety on our streets, we will not have a safe Upper East Side in any way, shape, and form. That is the reason why there are 400,000 people moving out of New York. That is the reason why they're gone, and they're gone not just temporarily, but they're leaving. They're saying bye-bye because they don't like the high rents, the huge amounts of expenses they have to pay, and what do they get in return? Basically unsafe streets where they can't even walk their dogs close to twilight.
So I think the majority of people who've left originally because of the pandemic, but you might be hitting on some reasons that people might be hesitant to come back. Assemblymember Quart, do you want to respond to some things Ms. Graham has said? Are people that you know, your constituents, are they worried about safety in the city? Should they be?
Of course, happy to respond. I do not have the ability to delve into the minds of hundreds of thousands of people to determine why they made life choices that they did, but I suspect much has to do with the pandemic and why they may have moved to different locations, and whether they come back or not is dependent upon a whole host of factors. But let's just deal with the issue of safety because Ms. Graham did bring it up. We are safe. We are a safe city. We've been safer than we've had in generations. Yes, there have been some upticks in crime within the 19th precinct area on grand larcenies and petty larcenies, but we also need to look at this holistically and honestly. If you look back to the end of in the 1990s, when we had 22,000 people at Rikers Island, a whole penal colony of people in Rikers Island, the homicide rate was exponentially higher than it is today. So yes, there have been some increases in crimes in specific categories, but we are not an unsafe city, nor are we an unsafe neighborhood. And to suggest so is simply untrue.
You are completely wrong on that.
Quick response, Ms. Graham, quick response.
Yes, okay. So he supported no bail reform. He also supported catch and release. He even supported for 7 years the gravity knife ban and got that repealed. And as a matter of fact, one of my employees was actually slashed because of that repeal of that ban. And he also just recently said that he thought that a resignation was due for the PBA because they supported Mr. Trump.
I did want to actually ask you,
Yes.
Ms. Graham sort of mentioned the resignations you called for. I was going to ask you more. You called for the resignation or the removal of the NYPD commissioner, Dermot Shea. Aside from the union leaders, that's, what I wanted to ask you about was calling for the NYPD commissioner to go. Can you explain that?
Sure, I can explain all three. The PBA, Lynch and Mullins, Mullins specifically has made statements that are discriminatory or bigoted in nature. They support right-wing conspiracy websites, and I think they're completely political, out of step with the constituencies they are supposed to serve. by trolling off to New Jersey to endorse Donald Trump for president. With respect to Shea, that's a different issue. I think he, in many ways, has been a deeply deficient police commissioner, and I've met with him personally, from his support of the spying technology that the NYPD employs upon communities of color, which infringes upon people's constitutional rights, to is basically a failed response to many of the protests in acting in some ways not showing sufficient leadership, that I don't think he should continue as police commissioner. And I've said that publicly, and I'll stick by that.
Okay, let's move on from some of that. Is there anything else, some member, you wanted to respond to in terms of the criticisms around bail reform or gravity knife reform? Just 30 more seconds.
Sure. Every Republican in the state legislature voted in support of my reform of the gravity knife bill. So Ms. Graham would be out of step with every single Republican in the state of New York by the position she espouses, which is certainly her right. But I think the viewers should know that my support of stopping Cy Vance from criminalizing working people from carrying something they bought at a hardware store was universally supported. And I'm proud of my effort. It was the right thing to do. And I defended it in front of my constituents for 7 years. And they have returned me to Albany repeatedly
Thank you.
over the last half decade.
May I just add?
I think we've covered a lot of that. If there's time at the end, maybe we can come back. But I do want to hit some other topics. Thank you. You both talked about taxes and the 1% in different ways. That relates, of course, to the major state budget deficit. And so if we could talk a little bit more about, as an assembly member, what you would advocate for to help the state recover financially. Do you have other ideas beyond what you've mentioned so far in brief in terms of what the state should be doing about what is well over a $10 billion budget deficit and recovery in terms of the state's fiscal picture? Let's start with you, Ms. Graham. What are your thoughts on how to help the state battle back from this fiscal deficit?
Well, first of all, the $10 billion debt didn't just happen because of the pandemic. We've had a huge debt of, I believe, about $8 billion going into the pandemic. So the state has been run very poorly and mismanaged extremely badly in the past several years. Now, that is not necessarily Mr. Quart's issue or problem, but it is a state issue and it is a state problem. So given that as a reality, going forward, to keep our hands out for federal money would be great and fine. But if we don't get it, how are we going to survive? And circling back to that, we live in the richest, single, most wealthiest unit in the entire world, per capita per person. Now, those people are comfortable with paying a little bit more in taxes. I speak to them. They're not opposed to that because they have the money. The reason they left is not necessarily because of pandemic. The reason they left is also because New York does not serve them anymore. Therefore, if they don't have all the reasons that they're here to be and they want to be here, why should they continue to pay New York taxes?
Are there things beyond public safety that you think is needed to bring some of these folks back, if they are indeed willing to come back and pay a little bit higher in taxes, as you mentioned?
Yes, I don't think they're opposed to paying a little bit higher in taxes. What I do think that they would like to have is to see security and safety restored on the street. The homeless population is completely out of control on the Upper East Side. It's day upon day, minute upon minute of really disaster.
Let's come back to homelessness in a moment. Assemblymember Quart, on the state budget picture, you mentioned a little bit of what you think should happen. Do you want to expand on that more? Talk about how the Assembly perhaps should be influencing the discussion with the Senate and the governor. There seem to be some very different positions being staked out. But what needs to happen on the state budget picture? And then also maybe towards the end, I'll come back to the homelessness question.
Well, Ben, as you know, there are only so many options to enhance revenue. And we may need to explore all of them. I talked earlier about the federal stimulus money, which obviously so much is dependent upon the November election in many ways. But Senator Chuck Schumer becoming majority leader and Joe Biden becoming president with Speaker Pelosi would ensure a more robust stimulus package with aid to New York State, which would help us. Absent that, or even with that, we should engage in a review of increase in taxes, and I've talked about that as well. We should also look at different policies that might have some dedicated source of revenue, like marijuana legalization, and I would support sports gambling because so much of the money is going to New Jersey anyways. So there is a menu of options, and I think we're going to have to engage in probably all of them to bring in additional revenue to avoid drastic cuts. And just to Ms. Graham's point, the deficit was not $8 billion going into this year. The deficit, to the extent it was, the state of New York must have a balanced budget by state constitution. There are interesting things that the state can do to ensure that it is balanced when it really isn't balanced. But let's be honest here with the facts.
Well, there was a significant deficit, mostly a lot of it related to Medicaid that had to be dealt with. And then,
that's right. But outside of pandemic, that would not be a budget deficit that the state could not deal with another Medicaid redesign or other minor revenue enhancers. But this deficit is specifically linked to the pandemic. And my constituents should understand.
Tax revenues dropped significantly. All right, let's talk about housing and homelessness. I wanted to get to that anyway. Ms. Graham brought it up. So coming back to you, Ms. Graham, what's the solution? What's the answer? What should be done about any increases in street homelessness you've seen, or just the larger ongoing crisis of homelessness that the city has been dealing with for years and decades?
I'm not speaking out of line or out of turn when I say that homelessness on the Upper East Side is gone rampant. It is completely out of control. I have seen some of the policies that Mr. Quart has supported, and I do know that he is a huge animal rights supporter. Supporter of animal rights homeless issues. Well, I think it's rather interesting that he puts animals homeless in front of people who are homeless. I know what they're doing out there. I know what's happening to people on the street. I see them. I see them begging. I see desperate situations. And what do you think
needs to be done? Yeah, go ahead.
What I think can happen, I think there is a three-part system that we need to do. Now, given the fact this is not a simple quick fix. It's a problem that we've had forever and ever, and it's never going to fix itself. So be it as it may, the issue that we have here is I fully believe that if we separate these things into three categories, we can start to get some headway. Category number one would be to temporarily find out the three categories. Who needs temporary homes? Who needs temporary help that can get back on their feet and get back into society? There are a lot of people out there like that. Secondly, homeless families. Yes, indeed, they have to have affordable housing. We need to take care of mothers with the average of 2 children in their families if they cannot do it themselves. And number three, those who are completely beyond really being able to be in society, they must be institutionalized because they are not adding to society. They actually, a two-problem stemmed issue here. It's not only a humanitarian one, it is a health issue as well.
Okay. And just to be clear, when you're talking about homelessness and animal rights, you're talking about the rights of homeless people to have animals with them?
Mr. Quart said he is a supporter of animal homelessness. In other words, getting shelters for animals.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's in his statements of things. Maybe he can provide.
I'm not saying it's not. I'm just not familiar.
But I think the truth of here is that I believe in humans go before animals any day.
Report. So your thoughts on state policies or city as well that you might want to advocate for. Obviously, you have more control in the state legislature over state policies, but to address homelessness.
Let me answer your question with actual policy prescriptions. The most important thing the state can do is build upon the great work of the Assembly on building a home stability support subsidy program for those on the precipice of eviction. This was a program that was working incredibly well in the mid-2000s and the early 2000s, but then was cut when there was a recession after the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. This is a subsidy program that really gets directly to those on the precipice of eviction and creates a subsidy program through the local jurisdictions, not specifically this, in the city of New York, that allows the municipality, the city in this respects, to go and help those that they know are in housing court or about to be evicted. I've been fighting, I've been a co-sponsor of that legislation, and finally it was created through the budget process, or reconfigured, if you will, through the budget process in the last year or two. But it has virtually, it only has a little money in it. I think that's the best way the state can help the city of New York, because we know these individuals on the precipice of eviction with 2 or 3 court orders where they can't pay their rent, they're about to be homeless. I think this program, this subsidy program, is the best avenue to make that bridge to make sure landlords get paid, but these individuals are not evicted. And I think that's the way the state can play a more positive role in helping the city, who has primary responsibility for homeless individuals on our streets and within our shelters.
We're going to stick with you as Assemblymember Quart. Two-part question, really. I'll start with the first part. You're obviously simultaneously running for Manhattan District Attorney. I want to give you a chance here to, sort of explain to constituents why they should reelect you to the Assembly here in the fall election while you're pursuing the Democratic nomination for Manhattan District Attorney in the June 2021 election. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ben. And we spoke about this in the last debate when I had my primary opponent. I have been honest and transparent with my constituents from September of last year about my desire to dislodge Cy Vance as being Manhattan District Attorney because of my deep dissatisfaction with him on a whole multitude of policies. Today is not the appropriate forum to discuss Mr. Vance's many failures, but I've been open and honest with my constituents that I want to continue to serve them in the Assembly, but long-term, I hope to serve them in a different capacity, in a different office. And I can do 2 things at once, and I have done 2 things at once. I have a strong voting record. I barely ever miss any votes. And most importantly, even last year when I announced my candidacy long-term for district attorney, I passed 6 different pieces of legislation. So there's no drop-off of my activity and my commitment to my constituents simply because I announced that I'm going to run for a different office in the future.
Okay. And Ms. Graham, want to give you an opportunity if there's anything on that subject you want to mention. I think it's as Assemblymember Quart indicated, I asked him about it during the primary discussion we had. I think it's a worthy topic for discussion as you face voters. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds on that and then ask you to move into your closing statement.
Mr. Quart is definitely looking for his own pocketbook. He is running on the working class ticket as well. And it's very understandable why he would want to be working and campaigning for 2 positions. 1, he wants to keep his Assembly job, and 2, he wants to be Manhattan DA. One does not serve the other. You cannot be full-time and be fully efficient. And this is the time and the place, and now is the critical time for a full-time resident to be representing the Upper East Side in Albany to get work done.
All right, into your closing statement, a minute for you, and then we'll come back to Assemblymember Quart for a minute in closing. Go ahead, Ms. Graham.
I have lived in New York for nearly 40 years. I was a transplant from Virginia, and I came here with a suitcase, $300 in my purse, and a dream. I followed that dream, and I've always loved this city. But now, New York City is in crisis mode. It's on life support. Upper East Siders are facing robberies, personal assaults, sexual assaults, shootings, a gamut of criminal activity, even things as simple as little tawdry thefts. Mr. Quart wants to bring to this a rather soft touch approach. It doesn't work, otherwise we wouldn't be in this huge dilemma that we're in. My agenda is realistic and it's reasonable. I will call it the ESP to get us out of this mess. First, E is economic. Economic, build, rebuild business, tax abatements, free day shopping. S is for safety. P is for planning. And by the way, Mr. Quart did say that all Republicans voted for his knife bill. I wanted to tell him to thank him for supporting the Second Amendment because those knives are weapons.
Thank you.
I am Judy Graham.
Thank you.
And I want everyone to vote for me and consider that. I am the person with the plan, the purpose, and a broom to clean up.
Assemblymember Quart, we're going to go to you for your closing statement. Your minute starts now.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Ms. Graham. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we need a tested and experienced leader in Albany who gets things done. And that's who I am, and that's what my record is. I spent a lifetime serving my community. As a pro bono attorney, I hosted legal clinics for tenants facing eviction. As a community board 8 member, I co-chaired the Transportation Committee, was chair of the 2nd Avenue Subway Task Force before we had a subway. And as your assembly member over the last 9 years, I fight for you every single day. And I hope you'll join with Congressmember Carolyn Maloney, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, both council members Ben Kalos and Keith Powers, State Senator Liz Krueger, in supporting my reelection to the Assembly this year.
Well, thank you, both candidates in Manhattan's 73rd Assembly District. It's been a spirited discussion. A reminder to all viewers and voters, all registered voters can walk in at poll sites during early voting or on Tuesday, November 3rd to vote in this election and many others, or you can vote by absentee ballot. Thank you for watching Represent NYC Election Coverage on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. For more election coverage or information, you can visit MNN.org or the League of Women Voters at LWVNY.org or us at GothamGazette.com. I'm Ben Max from Gotham Gazette. Goodbye.